I used Arthur's money to bail out my dad, and that idiot Mark fell for it!
Turn it off. Turn it off right now.
My future daughter-in-law called me a quote and whispered that she couldn't wait to dump me in a cheap nursing home, all while she was standing in the kitchen of the mansion I paid for. She didn't realize I was standing right behind the pantry door, hearing every single word of her plan to sell my estate to bail her criminal father out of prison. She thought I was just a walking bank account with a fading memory, but she had no idea that 25 years ago, I was the one who put her father behind bars and gave her mother a new identity. I decided right then to let her walk down the aisle in a $200,000 wedding, only to pull the rug out from under her in front of every influential person in this city. I'm Arthur. I'm 63, and in my long career as a high-level criminal attorney, I've learned one thing. The most dangerous people don't look like monsters. They look like the perfect girl next door. My son, Mark, is a brilliant architect, but when it comes to women, he is completely blind. He met Chloe 18 months ago, and from day one, I felt a chill in my bones. She was too polished, too polite, and far too interested in the legal structure of my family trust. Before we go further into how I uncovered her disgusting secret and the history that links us, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the conclusion of this story and other incredible tales of justice. Chloe treated me like a piece of furniture that had overstayed its welcome. At Sunday dinners, she would talk over me, or worse, talk about me in the third person, as if I were invisible. Quote, she'd say with a fake, sugary smile. Mark would just sigh, not wanting to upset his, quote. They didn't know that while they were planning my retirement, I was quietly reopening files from 1999 that contained names they thought were buried forever. The engagement dinner was held at one of those overpriced Italian restaurants where the lighting is too dim and the wine costs more than a used car. Mark was beaming, looking at Chloe like she was the only woman on earth. I sat there, nursing a glass of water, feeling like a stranger in my own life. Chloe had spent the first 20 minutes talking about the aesthetic of the wedding and how my old-fashioned views on the family estate were charming but outdated. She was already spending money I hadn't even given her yet. Then the door opened, and Chloe's mother walked in. Chloe jumped up, waving her over. A woman in her late 50s, draped in expensive silk and wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes, approached our table. Chloe introduced her as Elaine. The moment our eyes met, the air left my lungs. My mind raced back 25 years, to a dimly lit basement office and a woman trembling with fear, begging for a way out. She looked different, more surgery, better hair, but I never forget a face. Especially not one I spent 6 months hiding from the most dangerous men in the state. Arthur, this is my mother, Chloe said, her voice dripping with fake sweetness. Mom, this is Mark's father, the one I told you about. Elaine reached out a hand, her rings clicking against each other. It's a pleasure to finally meet the man who built such a substantial legacy, she said. Her voice had changed, more refined now, but the cadence was the same. I took her hand, my grip firm. I watched her eyes. For a split second, I saw a flicker of doubt, a shadow of a memory. She didn't recognize me yet. I had a full beard now, and 30 more pounds of muscle and age, but she knew those eyes. She didn't realize that I wasn't just some retired lawyer. I was the man who had orchestrated her, quote, 11 and rebirth. And more importantly, I was the man who had signed the papers that sent her husband, Chloe's father, to a maximum security cell for life. The following morning, Chloe and Elaine showed up at my house without an invitation. Mark was at work, and they knew it. They didn't even bother with the fake smiles this time. Chloe tossed a thick legal folder onto my mahogany coffee table, the sound echoing through the quiet living room. "Arthur, let's stop pretending," Chloe said, her voice sharp and cold. "This house is massive, and you're rattling around in it like a ghost. It's a waste of space and resources. Mark and I have discussed it, and we think it's time for you to move into a managed care facility." Elaine was standing by the window, touching my expensive curtains with a look of greed. "A facility would be much safer, Arthur," she added without looking at me. "You're getting forgetful. You're a liability here. Mark shouldn't have to worry about you falling down the stairs and lying there for days." The sheer audacity was breathtaking. This was the woman I had hidden from the mob, and now she was treating me like a broken toy. Chloe stepped closer, leaning over my chair until I could smell her expensive perfume. "I've had a lawyer draw up the deed transfer," Chloe hissed. "You're going to sign the estate over to Mark as a wedding gift. It's the right thing to do. If you don't, I'll make sure Mark sees you as the burden you are. I'll tell him you're becoming aggressive. I'll make sure he chooses me over you, and we both know who he'll believe." She was threatening to ruin my relationship with my only son, to steal my home. They saw a weak, aging man they could bully. I leaned back, putting on my best confused face, letting my hands tremble just a little. I need time to read this," I stammered, playing the part perfectly. "You have until the rehearsal dinner," Chloe snapped, grabbing her purse. "Sign it, or you'll be spending your final years completely alone." That night, I stayed in the shadows of my own home. They thought I was tucked away in my bedroom, likely drugged by the calming tea Chloe had made for me. I had poured it down the drain the moment she left the room. I sat in the dark and opened my tablet, accessing the hidden security cameras I had installed years ago. Discreet tech they didn't even know existed. Chloe and Elaine were sitting on the back patio, drinking my expensive scotch. Their voices were low, but the high-gain microphones caught every word. Chloe asked, her voice tight with stress. Gone was the sugary sweet girl. In her place was a cold, calculating woman. Elaine replied, swirling her drink. Chloe snapped. Elaine said, My blood turned to ice. They weren't just greedy. They were working for the man I had spent years of my life putting away, Victor Vane. He was a monster who had ruined countless lives, and now his daughter was trying to use my son to buy his freedom. They didn't just want my money. They wanted to destroy everything I had built. I sat in the dark, watching the screen, and for the first time in years, the old predator inside me woke up. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was the man who knew exactly how to make people like them disappear. The next morning, I called them into my study. I made sure my hands shook as I picked up the fountain pen. I wore an old, slightly stained sweater to look the part of a man who was losing his grip on reality. Chloe and Elaine were there in a heartbeat, hovering over me like vultures. I've thought about what you said, I whispered, keeping my voice thin. I don't want to be a burden to Mark. If he needs the house to start his life, I suppose I can move to the guest cottage for now. Chloe's eyes lit up with a predatory gleam. She pushed the deed transfer toward me. I signed the papers. I watched as they practically ripped the documents out of my hands. They thought they had won. What they didn't know, what their cheap lawyer hadn't checked, was the specific zoning and land lease agreement I had established decades ago. In this county, you can own a house, but if you don't own the ground rights under it, you're just a tenant. I had transferred the building to Mark, but the land? That remained in a separate, ironclad private trust that only I controlled. I said, leaning back and feigning exhaustion. Elaine said, a cruel smirk finally breaking through her mask. She didn't even try to hide her contempt anymore. They walked out of the room, laughing quietly. They probably thought I couldn't hear them, but my hearing was just fine. I heard Chloe say in the hallway. I sat in my chair, watching them leave through the security monitor. They had the house, but I had the trap. Now it was time to gather the rest of the ammunition. I spent the next 3 days locked in my basement office, a room they never bothered to enter because quote, they were too busy tasting expensive cakes and arguing over flower arrangements to notice that the, quote, 40 was digitizing evidence that could dismantle their lives in minutes. I opened a heavy, dust-covered safe hidden behind a false shelf. Inside were the original tapes from 1999. Back then, I was the young, hungry prosecutor who convinced Elaine to flip on her husband, Victor Vane. I remembered her tears, her terror, and the way she held a young Chloe in her arms while testifying about Victor's crimes. I had felt sorry for them. I had used my own money to ensure their transition into the witness protection program was seamless. I gave them a second chance at a clean life, and this was how they repaid me, by targeting my son. As I played the old video logs, I saw a younger Elaine admitting to things that would make a normal person's blood run cold. She wasn't a victim. She was a willing participant until the walls started closing in. But the real gold was what I found on their current phones. I had managed to clone Chloe's device while she was, quote, 41, me set up my new medicine organizer. I found a series of encrypted messages to a burner phone inside the state penitentiary. Chloe was sending her father photos of my bank statements, my property deeds, and even photos of Mark. One message read, "My heart ached for Mark. He was a pawn in a game played by professionals. He thought he was building a family, but he was actually funding a prison break for a man who had spent decades hating me." I packed a small USB drive and tucked it into my suit pocket. The stage was set. The night before the wedding, we held the rehearsal dinner at my estate. It was supposed to be a small, intimate gathering for the, quote, 44, quote. Chloe was glowing, wearing a white silk dress that probably cost more than a year's tuition at a community college. She was playing the role of the blushing bride to perfection, hovering around Mark and whispering in his ear. I caught her in the hallway near the kitchen while Mark was busy talking to the caterers. I decided to give her one last chance, not for her sake, but for my son's. I said softly, leaning against the wall. She stopped and looked at me, the mask of the sweet girl completely vanishing. She stepped into my personal space, her eyes cold as ice. She leaned in closer, her voice a sharp whisper. She patted my cheek and walked away, laughing. I felt a surge of adrenaline, but I didn't let it show. I just watched her go. She thought she had won. She didn't realize that everything she had just said, every threat and every admission of her plan, had been recorded by the tiny microphone clipped to the underside of my lapel. The morning of the wedding was bright and beautiful. The estate was transformed into a fairy tale setting, with white roses draped over every pillar and a massive glass marquee on the lawn. I sat in my room, dressing in my finest black tuxedo. My hands were steady now. The quote 49 was gone. I felt like I was back in the courtroom, preparing for the closing argument of my life. Mark came in to see me while I was fixing my tie. He looked handsome but exhausted. I looked at my son, and my heart broke for him. He hugged me, clearly relieved, thinking I was finally accepting the situation. Outside, the guests began to arrive. These were the most powerful people in the state, people who respected me, and people who would be horrified to learn they were attending a fundraiser for a convicted criminal. Chloe was in the bridal suite, likely counting the money in her head. Elaine was already in the front row, wearing a dress that screamed, quote, 53, acting like she owned the place. I walked down to the tech booth and handed him a small, silver USB drive. I whispered. I took my seat in the front row. Chloe began her walk down the aisle. She looked like an angel in white lace. As she passed me, she gave me a tiny, triumphant wink. She had no idea she was walking into a trap. The vows were over. The priest announced them husband and wife, and the crowd erupted in applause. Mark kissed Chloe, a look of pure joy on his face, while she looked like she had just won the lottery. As we moved to the reception tent, the atmosphere was electric. Champagne flowed, and the quote 56 took their seats at the head table. It was time for my toast. I stood up, tapping a spoon against my glass. The room went silent. I looked at Elaine, whose face was pale, and at Chloe, who was leaning back with a smug expression. I began, my voice booming through the speakers. I nodded to the tech booth. The giant screens didn't show engagement photos. Instead, a grainy video from a 1999 interrogation room appeared. The guests gasped as they saw a younger Elaine crying, admitting to helping her husband, Victor Vane, hide stolen funds. Then the screen split. On one side, the old confession. On the other, the recording from 2 nights ago of Chloe calling Mark an idiot and bragging about bailing her criminal father out with my money. The silence was deafening. Chloe jumped up, her face turning a sickly shade of purple. "Turn it off. Mark, make him stop. He's crazy." But I wasn't done. The final slide appeared on the screen, a copy of the land trust agreement. I said, looking Chloe dead in the eye. Mark looked at the screen, then at Chloe, his face twisted in horror and realization. He stood up, took off his ring, and dropped it into her champagne glass. The quote, 63 wedding had turned into a public execution of her reputation. Chloe tried to scream, but the guests were already turning their backs. The aftermath was chaotic. Chloe and her mother tried to scream about their quote, 64 quote, but the security team I'd hired escorted them off the property before the main course was even served. They left in a cheap taxi, still wearing their designer dresses, with nowhere to go and no way to access the money they thought was theirs. My son Mark stayed with me. We sat in my study that night, and for the first time in years, we actually talked. He apologized for not seeing through the mask, and I apologized for having to break his heart to save his life. In the months that followed, Mark and I used the quote 65 to start a foundation for victims of financial fraud. It turns out, helping people feels a lot better than hiding from the past. I'm 63, and I've never felt more alive. I've started traveling, teaching law students about ethics, and I've even started dating a wonderful woman who doesn't care about my estate. As for Chloe and Elaine, their father's appeal was denied because the bribe money never arrived. They are back in the shadows, where they belong. I reclaimed my home, my son, and my peace of mind. I'm no longer the senile old man they can push around. I'm a man who knows that justice isn't just something that happens in a courtroom. Sometimes, you have to build it yourself, one brick at a time. Looking back at everything, I have to ask you, did I go too far by humiliating them in front of everyone they knew? Or did I do exactly what was necessary to protect my family? What would you have done if you were in my shoes? If you enjoyed this story of long-awaited justice, please hit the like button and leave a comment below with your thoughts. I read every single one of them. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another incredible story of revenge and redemption. The end. Thank you for listening.